Hey everyone, welcome back to Karenology. This story will have you shaking your head in disbelief. They came at dawn. Not like thieves, not like neighbors either. Something in between. I was halfway through my second cast when I saw the shadows moving through the pine trees. Careful not to snap twigs. 3 of them, dressed like they were going bird watching, with clipboards and laminated name tags bouncing on their vests. No one said good morning. No one smiled. The tall one with the thick gray eyebrows stepped onto my dock like he owned the damn thing and handed me a white envelope. Unauthorized fishing, $5,000 fine, Homeowner Association Regulation 34B. He said it with the kind of voice that people use when they know you can't do a damn thing about it. I just stood there, rod still in hand. The lake calm behind me like it hadn't heard a thing. I didn't move. Not until they turned around and started filming me with a tablet. I could see the red recording light blinking. You're on camera, the short one added, smug. Just for your own documentation. They vanished the same way they came. Quiet. Quick. Like a patrol. Only the envelope stayed, heavy with something more than just paper. I opened it. Not only was I being fined for fishing on the property I'd lived on for 27 years, but they also claimed I had violated new conservation zoning policies. Effective 2 weeks ago. Approved in a closed meeting. I never got the memo. And if I had, I would have fed it to the fireplace. Funny thing is, that lake was the last thing my wife touched before the cancer took her. She used to sit on the edge of the dock every Sunday with a thermos of tea and tell me stories about what the clouds look like. Said it calmed her. Said it felt like home. That dock was our church. I watched the HOA team vanish behind the trees. Then I reeled in my line. I hadn't caught anything, but they had. A moment. A piece of me. And they yanked it without flinching. The next morning, the signs went up. Bright yellow ones nailed to trees along the bank. Waterfront activity monitored by homeowner. Association cameras. And sure enough, they weren't bluffing. I spotted one, a small black dome peeking out from a spruce near the property line. Later, I found another, under the overhang of my boathouse. They'd turned the place into a surveillance zone. My sanctuary became evidence. I called the HOA office, tried to get Karen Barlow on the phone, head of the association, queen bee of the cul-de-sac empire. Got her assistant instead. She said Ms. Barlow was unavailable for non-agenda grievances, that if I had a complaint, I could file it through the online portal. I asked where that portal was. She said, "On the HOA website, sir." "And you just fined me for using my own dock," I said. "You're going to tell me that's legal?" The Homeowner Association retains temporary conservation authority over shared water access, she replied, like she was reading from a pamphlet. Per the new municipal partnership agreement. That was the first I'd heard of any partnership. I hung up. 2 days later, I got a warning in the mail. A second infraction notice, claiming I'd interfered with HOA equipment by trimming branches near the camera. The truth? I'd cut down a dying limb that was hanging over my grill. But apparently it had partial line of sight to their camera. They included a grainy black and white still frame in the letter, showing me mid-swing with the saw. It looked like surveillance footage from a prison yard. I drove to town, tried to meet with someone at the municipal office. The clerk pointed me toward a binder filled with public notices. There it was, sandwiched between a septic tank permit and a zoning variance request. An agreement granting the Homeowner Association temporary ecological management over Lake Greystone. Effective retroactively. They had turned the lake into paperwork. And somewhere in the fine print, they gave themselves teeth. That night, I couldn't sleep. I walked the shoreline with a flashlight, checking for more cameras, tripwires, God knows what. That's when I saw them again. The trio from before, back near the north end, standing around like they were scouting something. I stayed in the shadows, listened. One of them joked about how easy it was to catch me. He's like clockwork, 5:45 every morning. You don't even need a decoy. I went home. I sat in the dark. And I remembered something my wife once said when we first moved out here. If someone ever tries to take this place from us, you better make sure they never forget the price. The next morning, I made coffee, packed up the old documents from the storage chest, blueprints, purchase contracts, even the faded map her father had drawn of the original land parcels. I wasn't sure what I was looking for, but I knew damn well I was going to find it, because if they wanted to fight over my dock, over my lake, over my peace, they were about to learn that not all wars are won with laws and cameras. Some are won with memory and grit, and one very, very pissed off old man. Turns out, land remembers better than people. The further I dug into those dusty old boxes, the more I found things that didn't match up with what the Homeowner Association was claiming. My property line was drawn by hand back then, with ink that had bled through the years. But the intent was clear. The dock, the stretch of shoreline, even the damn fishing shed. All of it sat within the boundary lines that her father had marked in 1972. I laid it out on the kitchen table, overlapping the old map with the digital printouts from the county website. They didn't match, not even close. Somewhere along the way, the lake had shifted on paper. Maybe not in reality, but in whatever zoning software they were using now. The new lines cut through Srio, my land like a cleaver, shaving off just enough to make the dock shared property. It was no coincidence. Someone had filed a rezoning proposal 5 years ago, citing ecological concerns. No signatures from homeowners, no public meetings. Just a line item. One that took inches from every property on this side of the lake and added them to a buffer zone that the Homeowner Association had claimed. That's how they got their cameras, their fines, their foot in the door. I called my friend Jerry, retired surveyor, stubborn as a mule, and owed me more than a few favors from our poker days. He came by that afternoon with a worn briefcase and a cigarette that never left the corner of his mouth. We walked the property for 2 hours. He paced, measured, mumbled, then finally stood still by the stump near the water line. That this here? This used to be the marker, no doubt about it, he said, tapping his boot on the stone buried in the dirt. If their lines cut through this, they're either crooked or blind. You think it's enough? I asked. For court? Maybe. For war? Damn right. He gave me copies of his notes and told me he'd write up an affidavit if I needed one. Then he looked me dead in the eyes and said something I didn't expect. They did this to my cousin in Oak Ridge. Same game. He ended up selling. moved into a condo. You're not going to be that guy, are you? I shook my head. No. I'm going to be the reason they stop playing. But before I could do anything, they hit me again. It was the morning after Jerry left. I opened the mailbox and found a new envelope. This one had a red stripe across the top. Immediate action required. They were accusing me of violating wildlife nesting protocol. Apparently, I had disturbed a heron's nesting site while mowing my lawn. They included a blurry photo. I couldn't even see a bird in it. But the fine? Twice $800. I knew what they were doing. Paper cuts. Death by bureaucracy. One fine at a time. One accusation after another. Until I was too tangled in their mess to breathe. The last straw came that Friday. I got home from town and saw 2 HOA trucks parked near the edge of my drive. A couple of them were talking with my neighbor, Sandy, a sweet woman in her 70s who used to bake cookies for the whole block. She wouldn't even meet my eyes. I walked up, asked what was going on. The guy with the clipboard said, "We're conducting a wildlife impact survey. Ms. Barlow authorized it. We'll be placing a temporary access gate here." "Here?" I said, pointing at my gravel driveway. "You mean on my property?" "Temporary," he said. "Just for equipment passage." I didn't yell, didn't threaten. Just stood there, silent, until they got uncomfortable enough to fidget. Then I went inside, and I broke something. Not out of rage, not yet, just an old lamp that I never liked anyway. But it was the moment I knew this wasn't about the lake anymore. This was about erosion. Slow, calculated erosion of who I was, of what I stood for. I sat down at the kitchen table and stared at those maps again. Traced the ink lines my father-in-law had drawn. I thought about the nights my wife used to sit on that dock and talk about clouds. About how peace felt like water. Silent. Still. But always ready to shift. They had no idea what they woke up. Not really. Because the funny thing about erosion is, once it starts, it can work both ways. The next morning, I got up before the sun, took a walk down to the edge of the water, and I buried a waterproof camera beneath the dock, angled just right. Then I waited, because if they wanted to turn my life into a file folder, I was going to give them something they couldn't redact. I was going to make them feel watched. I was going to show them how it feels to be trespassed in silence, and I was just getting started. I waited 3 mornings before the first bite. Not from a fish. Those hadn't been biting for weeks. But from the Homeowner Association's crew. They came early. Not as early as me, but early enough to think they were catching me unaware. What they didn't realize was that I'd already reviewed 3 days of footage from my dock camera. Motion triggered. Crystal clear. Time-stamped. At 6:17 a.m., Karen Barlow herself stepped onto my dock. No hesitation. She was alone in hiking boots and a lime green windbreaker, holding a folder and a measuring tape. She walked to the end, glanced around, and began snapping pictures with her phone. After that, she knelt, right on the boards, and slid a measuring tape from the edge of the dock inward. She stayed for 7 minutes. That's 7 minutes of unauthorized presence on private property. 7 minutes of hypocrisy caught from a perfect angle. I made 5 copies of the footage, stored each in a separate place, uploaded one to a cloud server under a fake name. I didn't need to act on it yet. But having the proof was like keeping a bullet in your pocket when someone keeps flashing a knife. The funny part? Once you start watching people, you realize how sloppy they are when they think you're broken. The HOA trucks came by 4 times that week, just slow enough to leer at the house. One guy even knocked on my door pretending to be from the electric company. Said he needed to check the meter. I told him the meter was on the other side. He left without arguing. Meanwhile, I kept digging. And what I found next changed everything. There's a property registry most folks don't know about. It's not on the county site. It's buried in the historical annex records, digitized only halfway and full of typos. Took me hours of staring at microfilm and old PDFs, but eventually I found something. A land transfer in 1985. A peculiar one. My wife's father, Ernest Garrison, had sold a sliver of lake access to the town under the condition that it remain a public trust, not HOA, not private, public. The trust was set to expire automatically if the land was repurposed for private enforcement, which meant the minute the Homeowner Association started issuing fines and installing surveillance, technically, they nullified the agreement. The town should have reclaimed that land. But no one had noticed or cared until now. I made an appointment with a man named Clark, the town's acting land compliance officer. He was the kind of guy who wore a tie, even on Zoom calls, and corrected your grammar if you said less when you meant fewer. But he listened, took notes, asked questions. Technically, he said, if what you're saying is accurate, the association may have overstepped. No, not may have. Did. House. Well, then someone should file a formal claim. I just did, and with that, I took the first real swing back. The next week was silent. No new fines, no new letters. Just silence. And silence in a fight like this is never peace. It's regrouping. The calm before someone tries to hit you where it hurts most. They found it a few days later. I came home from a supply run to find police tape across my boathouse. A laminated notice flapping in the breeze. Environmental hazard. Investigation pending. Do not enter. They claim my fuel canisters, sealed, regulated, stored in compliance, were a contamination threat. Based on what? An anonymous tip. And that was the moment I realized the game had shifted. This wasn't about property anymore. It wasn't even about control. It was about character assassination. They wanted to make me a liability, a nuisance, a problem to be solved. I stood in front of the tape for a long time, listening to the gulls cry over the water, thinking about my wife's voice when she used to read out loud on the dock, thinking about what it meant to be pushed, to be framed, to be hunted in your own home. They thought they could turn the town against me, that I'd bend under shame. But they forgot one thing. Shame only works if you're wrong. I wasn't. That night, I printed out the still of Karen on my dock, blew it up to poster size, laminated it, and nailed it to the oak tree at the edge of the property, facing the trail where HOA staff always passed by. Captioned it myself. Unauthorized use of private property. Fine pending. The next day, the sign was gone, but I had 3 backups. And the only thing louder than a camera is a mirror. I was done defending. Now I was going on offense. The night after I nailed up that sign, I slept better than I had in weeks. Not because the fight was over. Hell no. But because for once I wasn't just reacting. I was leading, taking ground. And believe me, when you've been pushed long enough, taking even 1 inch back feels like a revolution. The next morning, the silence was replaced by tension. Not a word from the Homeowner Association, but their presence grew thicker. A new pickup parked across the street. Same guy, every day, sitting behind tinted glass with a clipboard and coffee cup, pretending to check his phone. Trail cameras popped up overnight, ones I hadn't placed, hidden in hollowed logs and behind birdhouses. I found 4 in total. One was bolted under the edge of my rain gutter. That afternoon, I got a call from Clark, the town officer I'd filed the claim with. His voice was tight, professional, but I could tell something had shifted. "Mr. Garrison," he said, "I've received a notice that your claim is under internal review. We're pausing all external action until further clarification." "Why?" There's concern that your documentation may have inconsistencies." "Inconsistencies?" I snapped. "That's code for someone got to you." He didn't answer. Just sighed. Said, "I'm sorry," and hung up. Later that day, Jerry showed up. My old surveyor buddy. He looked grim. Dropped a manila folder on my porch table and said, "They're discrediting my license. Claimed I falsified boundary data in Oak Ridge back in '09. Never happened. But the board's reviewing my records." He lit a cigarette with shaking fingers. "Mark, they're not fighting fair, Mark. They're digging through everything. Trying to bury us in mud." I nodded. "Then let's drown them in truth. Menine." He gave me a tired grin. "You always were better at speeches than poker." That evening, I took stock. Not just of papers and evidence, but of allies. Jerry, still standing but rattled. My neighbor Sandy, cold and silent. The rest of the street, avoiding eye contact. I was alone. And that wasn't new. But this time, it was dangerous. So I did the only thing that made sense. I turned the tables. At 3 a.m., I walked down to the dock and swapped the hidden camera for a decoy. One that blinked, beeped, and looked real as hell. I let them see it. Let them wonder what else I had. The next day, I installed 3 dummy cameras around the house, each one angled at a different corner of the lake. Then I went quiet. Dead quiet. No emails, no calls. Just routine. Coffee, fishing rod, slow walks along the trail, and always, always near the cameras. By day 5, the HOA's paranoia bloomed. The pickup doubled. I spotted Karen herself one morning, walking with her little clipboard like she was rehearsing for a courtroom. That's when I launched Phase 2. I leaked an anonymous tip to the local conservation group, a real one, that the Homeowner Association might be conducting unauthorized soil treatment on protected shoreline. Technically true. I'd seen one of their crew dumping bags of something into a drainage inlet 3 weeks back. Didn't think much of it then. Now? It was ammunition. 2 days later, the group showed up. Vests, cameras, notebooks. I didn't say a word to them. Just offered coffee and pointed toward the HOA's temporary gate. They spent 4 hours taking samples, and suddenly the Homeowner Association wasn't so loud. That weekend, I drove out to the county archive. The good one, 3 towns over. paid a clerk $50 to stay late and help me dig through old land trust agreements. And there it was, a clause buried in a 1974 conservation easement. Any trust land misused by private entities could trigger a retroactive forfeiture clause, one that allowed the original grantor's heirs to file for full reclamation. My wife was that heir, which made me the last living link. The law was archaic, obscure, but still on the books. I remember staring at that clause, hands trembling, knowing I had just unearthed the key they thought was buried for good. On the way home, I passed the lake. The moonlight shimmered across the water like a blade. I stopped the truck, stepped out, and just stood there, breathing, remembering her voice, the warmth of her hand on mine the first time we walked that dock. "If someone tries to take this place from us," she'd said, "you make sure they remember it." Oh, they would, because now I had the weapon. And soon they'd feel the weight of history crashing down like a wave they never saw coming. I didn't sleep that night. The document sat on the kitchen table under the lamp's yellow glow, ancient ink curling at the edges, the words heavy like scripture. The forfeiture clause was there in black and white, signed by men who'd been dead for decades, but their ink still carried weight. My wife's name was on the chain of inheritance, and by extension, mine. It wasn't a silver bullet. It was something better. A doorway. At dawn, I drove into town and stopped at the one place no one in their right mind visits without a lawyer: City Records. The woman behind the counter, Cheryl, knew me by face but not by name. I handed her the easement copy, my ID, and a cover letter I'd typed at 2 a.m. with hands that wouldn't stop shaking. She read it all slowly. Once, then again, her fingers tracing the paragraph with the clause. You sure you want to open this?" she asked. "I'm already neck deep in it. Then I'll file the preliminary request. But just so you know, this'll rattle cages. I'm counting on it." By lunchtime, my phone had no fewer than 11 missed calls. All unlisted numbers. I didn't answer any. Instead, I took a long walk by the lake, each step a silent countdown. At 4:35 p.m., the first visitor arrived. Not Karen, not HOA, a lawyer. Slim, pressed suit, silver tie, shoes that had never touched gravel. He pulled up in a leased Mercedes and walked straight to my porch. Mr. Garrison, I'm here on behalf of the Homeowner Association to discuss a potential misunderstanding." There's no misunderstanding," I interrupted. "I filed a reclamation petition. The land was misused. The clause is valid." He adjusted his cuffs. "With respect, our legal team believes this may constitute an overreach. Perhaps we could find a mutually beneficial..." I stepped closer. "You ever bury your wife? You ever sit next to a dock while someone you love fades away piece by piece, and the only thing that keeps them calm is the smell of water and pine?" He blinked, thrown. That dock was her peace. That lake was her light. And your people turned it into a surveillance zone. So no deals, no settlements, no handshakes. He left without another word. That night, the threats started. First, a letter slid under my door, typed, unsigned, full of legalese and veiled promises of civil liability. Then came the spotlight, literally. At midnight, someone aimed a high-powered beam into my windows from across the lake. It stayed there for an hour. I didn't flinch. I turned on every light in the house, made coffee, and stood in the kitchen reading the easement again. They were scrambling. That much was clear. The next day, I visited Jerry. He was quiet, pale, eyes sunken, like the fight was draining from him. They're going after my license again, threatening to open an ethics review. Don't cave, I said. He handed me a folder. I'm not, but you need to see this. Inside were old photographs, aerial images of the lake from the 80s, taken by the state for floodplain assessments. In the corner of one, you could clearly see a line of posts along the bank. Not just any posts. Boundary markers. If you line these up with today's GIS map, he said, they prove the HOA's zoning map is a lie. The land they claim control over was never theirs. Proof, tangible, visual, undeniable. We spent that night scanning, printing, aligning maps like war generals. And make no mistake, this was war. Only the weapons were paper, photos, history, and memory. The day after, I filed a secondary petition attaching the photos, the surveys, the easement, and Jerry's affidavit. This time, I delivered it in person to the county commission office. A young assistant tried to wave me off. I asked for his supervisor. When she came, I laid everything on her desk and said, "If this doesn't get logged today, I'll drive it to the state attorney's office myself." She looked at me like she'd seen a ghost. "We'll log it." That evening, back at the cabin, the wind picked up. Clouds rolled in low and gray. Stormlight, my wife used to call it. That eerie glow before the sky rips open. I stood on the dock, barefoot, watching the wind push ripples across the lake. And for the first time since this started, I felt something rise up in me that I hadn't felt in years. Conviction. Not rage, not vengeance, but a cold, calm clarity. The kind a man only finds when there's nothing left to lose, but everything still worth protecting. They'd used fear, intimidation, lies, and I had used patience. Now I had the truth, and soon the storm would come. The storm hit at midnight. Thunder rolled low like a warning growl from the belly of the world. Rain came sideways, slashing against the windows in sheets, drumming on the roof hard enough to shake picture frames. I stood in the living room with the lights off, coffee in hand, watching the dock disappear behind the wall of water. It felt fitting, cleansing. While the world outside boiled, my phone lit up with messages, emails, notifications, 2 voicemails from blocked numbers. One was just breathing, the other was static, and what sounded like distant, muffled laughter. I didn't answer. I didn't flinch. They were desperate. By morning, the lake had calmed, but left its scars. Broken branches, water pooled where it shouldn't be, mud tracks on the trail. I stepped outside barefoot, let the wet earth remind me I was still standing, and then I saw it. The dock was gone, not damaged. Gone. Vanished. My first thought was the storm. Maybe the wind snapped the posts. Maybe the rain lifted it free. But no. No debris, no shattered planks, not a single nail. It had been taken, stolen. I stood there for 10 full minutes, frozen, my mind blank. Then something in my chest cracked. Not rage, not grief, something deeper. Like a thread pulled too tight, finally snapping. That dock was the last place I kissed my wife. the last place she smiled before the pain took her voice. We used to sit there in silence and just breathe. And now it was gone. They thought this would break me. It didn't. It turned me into something they weren't ready for. I walked inside, dried off, sat at the kitchen table, and pulled out a notebook. Time to make a list. Not of evidence, not of filings, of vulnerabilities. Over the next 3 days, I mapped the association. Not the people, the structure. Who approved what? When? Where the money went. I pulled tax records, business filings, contracts tied to their landscaping, camera equipment, environmental audits. I traced connections between vendors and HOA board members, and I found it. A landscaping contract issued to a shell company. On paper, just a grounds maintenance crew. But the address matched a P.O. box belonging to Karen Barlow's cousin. Payments in cash equivalents. No bids filed, no competitive quotes, just one signature. Hers. Fraud. Pure and simple. But I needed more. So I called someone I hadn't spoken to in years. Nate Caldwell. Former IRS investigator. Retired early after his whistleblower case shook up 2 counties and made him a legend in small-town auditor circles. He picked up on the second ring. Garrison? Yeah. I need your eyes. Karen finally pushed too far. She stole my doc. Silence. Then a low whistle. I'll be there tomorrow. Nate showed up with 2 laptops, a portable scanner, and that same deadpan grin he always wore when he smelled blood in the water. Within 4 hours, he'd pulled enough anomalies to choke a horse. False invoices, duplicate payments, routing slips signed after delivery dates. It wasn't just shady. It was criminal. We printed everything, highlighted, cross-referenced, packaged it into a folder thick as a phone book. I can get this to the state compliance board anonymously, he said. But if you want the kill shot, you'll need to go louder. No press, no public circus, I said. We do this clean, strategic. Nate nodded. Then you need to make her move first. Force her hand. That night, I walked the trail behind the HOA meeting house. Found the service door unlocked. No security, just laziness. I left a copy of the contract folder on Karen's desk. No note, no explanation. Let her wonder. Let her sweat. The next morning, I got a knock at the door. Not the sheriff. Not Karen. But Sandy, my neighbor. First time she'd spoken to me in weeks. I didn't know, she said, eyes red, about the dock. I saw the trucks that night. Thought they were fixing something. They weren't. I'm sorry. I should have said something. You still can. She paused. They asked me to report on you. Said you were a risk. And now? She looked down. Now I think they're the risk. Before she left, she handed me a flash drive. You didn't get this from me. It was security footage from her back camera. Night vision. Clear as day. 3 HOA trucks. 5 men. Midnight, power tools. And Karen Barlow standing at the shoreline, pointing toward my dock. Game over. But not yet, because I wasn't done. Not until they understood, truly understood, what it means to try and erase a man's peace. They hadn't taken the dock. They'd given me the fire to burn down their whole facade. I didn't call the sheriff. I didn't blast the footage across the internet or show up at a town hall waving the flash drive like a torch. No, that would have been too easy, too loud. And I wasn't after noise. I wanted collapse. So I waited. 2 days. 3. Let the silence wrap around Karen like a noose she couldn't see yet. I imagined her pacing that HOA office, eyes darting between the folder I'd left and her phone, wondering who else knew, who'd seen the files, who she could still trust. The flash drive Sandy gave me? I made 10 copies. Sent them to 3 attorneys, 1 state compliance office, a pair of retired judges I knew through my wife, and a land rights nonprofit that used to partner with veterans. All under aliases. No return address. By the 4th day, I got word. 2 board members resigned quietly. One of them sold his house within a week. But Karen? She didn't run. She doubled down. That afternoon, a notice appeared on my front gate. Hand delivered. Not even mailed. It was an HOA declaration of behavioral non-compliance. Translated, they were declaring me a threat to community order. It had no legal teeth. Just bureaucratic gibberish. But it meant one thing. I was being isolated. She was trying to paint me as unstable. Dangerous. A man out of control. Problem was, she had no idea how calm I'd become. I spent that evening on the back porch. Whiskey glass untouched, staring across the lake where my dock used to be. The space looked emptier now, yes, but also honest. Like a wound no longer hidden. And then it happened. Headlights. Not HOA, trucks. Unmarked SUV, black, county plates. They parked halfway up the gravel path. 2 men stepped out. Suits, thin black binders in hand. Mr. Garrison? I didn't answer. Just nodded. Tinen, we're with the State Oversight Committee on Municipal Ethics. Would you have a moment? I gestured to the porch chairs. They didn't sit. We've received several independent reports regarding misappropriation of funds, falsified zoning records, and possible intimidation tactics involving the Greystone Lake Homeowner Association. And we'd like your cooperation. Quietly, for now. I smiled. Not out of victory, but because the wheel had finally turned. I've got coffee and everything you need inside. We spent 3 hours at my kitchen table. I handed them every document, every video, every map Jerry and I had assembled. They didn't speak much, just took notes, asked specific questions. At the end, one of them, stockier guy, older, closed his folder and said, "This is the cleanest case of civic fraud I've seen in years." Then he added, "But it won't be quick. These things never are. I'm not going anywhere." Before they left, he turned to me. "They're going to get nervous, sloppy. Be ready." He had no idea how ready I already was. The next morning, the final crack appeared. Karen showed up at my front gate. No clipboard. No blazer. Just her. Sweating. Pale. Her hair in a hurried bun, like she'd been up all night rewriting lies. Can we talk?" she said. I stepped out onto the porch. Said nothing. She tried to smile, the way politicians do. "There's been misunderstanding. I believe we can come to terms." I waited. "I'm willing to discuss restoration of the dock, of certain privileges." I stepped down, crossed the gravel slowly until we were face to face at the gate. "I don't want restoration," I said. "I want accountability." "Mark," she said, voice cracking, "this could ruin people. Their reputations, their families. You should have thought about that before you brought war to a man with nothing left to lose." For a moment, her face twisted. Rage, fear, shame, all crashing through in a single blink. Then she turned and walked away. As she reached her car, I said, "The lake remembers, Karen, and so do I." That night, the lake was still, moonlight like glass. And for the first time since this began, I felt peace not as a memory, but as a presence. Something had shifted, not just out there, in me, and it was almost time to finish it. Peace didn't last long. By the end of the week, someone had tried to burn my fishing shed to the ground. They came at night. I only caught it because my trail camera caught the flicker first. 2 figures in dark hoodies, one carrying a gas can. They poured, they lit, and they ran. Wind and rain that night saved the structure. Scorched siding, blackened grass, but the fire hadn't spread. I watched the footage 3 times. Fists clenched. Then I called Nate. By noon, he'd identified one of the license plates caught in the background. A contractor who'd been paid under the fake landscaping firm we'd traced to Karen's cousin. The line between corruption and desperation had vanished. But here's the thing about war. The last one to blink wins. So I didn't blink. Instead, I filed a restraining order. Not through HOA channels. Directly with the county. Attached the footage, the contracts, and a sworn affidavit from Nate himself. But that wasn't all. Because the final play, the one I'd been building toward since they took my dock, was almost ready. That night, I pulled out a blueprint. Not of my property. Of the lake. The original hand-drawn map from Ernest Garrison, my wife's father. On it was a small, unlabeled parcel near the center of the water, marked only by a faded X. I'd always assumed it was sentimental, a spot where they fished, a memory. But now I knew better. Digging through Ernest's will again, I found it. A single clause transferring control of a protected parcel, technically submerged land, to his daughter. No one had ever filed development rights. No taxes levied. Just a legal ghost sitting silent in the county books. Until now, I filed a reclamation claim for that land, which meant that technically, the heart of the lake, the water HOA claimed as shared recreational space, was mine. And then I made my move. The next day, I installed 4 buoys and a solar-powered sign. It read, "Private property, no access, protected zone, under restoration." Karen's scream echoed across the lake before I even made it back to the shore. She called me. I didn't answer. She emailed. I ignored it. She showed up the following morning. This time, not alone. 2 lawyers in tow. One had a printed packet thick as a Bible. The other looked like he hadn't slept in days. Eyes. "Mark," she started. Her voice was strained, brittle. "This is obstruction. You have no right." The land's on record. Deed confirmed. County clerk stamped it yesterday. But the Homeowner Association, doesn't govern what it never owned." One of her lawyers tried to step forward. I stopped him cold. "You're on private property. Take another step. I call the sheriff." They left. That afternoon, I received the email I'd been waiting for from the Oversight Committee. The investigation had escalated. Formal hearings were being scheduled. Karen and several board members were under official review, but that wasn't victory yet. Victory came the next morning. I woke to the sound of construction, stepped outside, and saw them. 3 trucks hauling the remains of my dock. They weren't HOA crews, they were local veterans. A friend of Nate's had heard the story, passed it along, and now, without asking for payment or permission, they were rebuilding it, board by board. Not out of pity, out of principle. Karen showed up again that evening. She didn't make it past the gate. I watched from the porch as she stood there, watching my new dock take shape. Her face was unreadable, but I saw it the moment it broke her. Not the legal fights, not the exposure, but this, a man she tried to erase standing taller than before. With peace rebuilt plank by plank, not in silence, but in defiance. I didn't wave, didn't speak, just turned and went inside, leaving her to stare across the lake she thought she owned. Let her feel what I had felt, and know it wouldn't end with her shame. It would end with my justice. The dock took 2 full days to rebuild. They worked in the rain, through wind and early frost, their boots sinking into the mud and gravel, their tools steady and sure. No one asked for thanks. No one asked why. They just built. Older men with calloused hands, and younger ones with quiet focus. Nate was there too, mostly handing out coffee, his eyes scanning the tree line like he was still on a stakeout. By the 3rd morning, I stepped out barefoot and stood on the new planks. They creaked different, smelled of fresh-cut cedar and linseed oil. But the water beneath them was the same, deep, familiar, and still mine. I sat there for a long time, not fishing, just watching, letting my breath slow, letting the memory of her settle next to me like it used to. Then came the call. The Oversight Committee had reached their findings. Karen Barlow was to be permanently removed from her position on the Homeowner Association board. She'd be barred from holding any governance role in the state for 10 years. Criminal investigations were being opened regarding financial misconduct and conspiracy to defraud. I didn't cheer, just poured myself a coffee and stared out at the lake. She wasn't the only one who lost something. That's the part people never understand about winning. You don't walk away whole, you walk away clean. There was more fallout in the weeks that followed. The association fractured. A new interim board was elected, and not one of Karen's old allies made the cut. Nate submitted his full report to the Attorney General's office. I never asked what else he found. Sandy stopped by again. Brought cookies this time. Said the neighborhood felt different now. Lighter. Like a bad season had passed. I thanked her. But I didn't stay long on the porch. I had work to do. The lake needed care. The land needed trimming. And the dock, well, it needed breaking in. One evening, I took the old thermos from the cupboard, the one she used to fill with mint tea every Sunday. I brewed some, sat on the edge of the dock. The sun dipped low, turning the water to copper and fire. I raised the thermos. To the ones they underestimate, I said quietly. To the quiet men, the stubborn ones. The ones they thought had already surrendered. A breeze rolled in, soft and cool, and I swear, just for a moment, the lake shimmered back at me. Karen moved out of the neighborhood a month later. Her house sold at a loss. The rumors said she'd taken a job in another state. Smaller place. Less responsibility. I didn't care. This was never about her. It was about the principle. And now that it had been defended, I could finally return to the life I was building before they tried to take it from me. Not a loud life, but a good one. Some mornings I fish, some I just sit, but always, always, I remember this. When the world pushes you and you stand, truly stand, sometimes the world shifts. Sometimes it learns your name, and sometimes it learns to leave you the hell alone.